Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston. If this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, your playing, and your production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, please hit the subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we are taking a look at the noise engineering Dystorpia. I felt something in making my bat verb demo for noise engineering that I feel in spades in this one, and that's this. Noise engineering is definitely not a brand for everybody, but for the people who it is for the people who connect with the particular brand of angular and weird that noise engineering brings to the table, this is a pretty invaluable company. Noise engineering is obviously pretty well known for their Eurorack modules, and their forays into the pedal world have been rife with all the same kind of experimental avant-garde ambition that their counterparts in the modular space have. The Dystorpia is an open air quotes Fuzz, close air quotes. And the reason I put such giant air quotes and a giant asterisk on that is because it is technically a fuzz. It is a digital fuzz, but it feels something as similar to a resynthesizer wearing the skin of a fuzz as it does a digital fuzz itself. This is a really interesting pedal with a bunch of very interesting approaches to it. Obviously, digital fuzzes are a thing that exists that we have heard in modeling and in the kind of effects world in general, but the decision for noise engineering to chase this down makes a ton of sense given their background in modular in the first place. And the result of that background is a really bizarre take on digital fuzz. You have a gain control that is not a gain control that you would expect from a lot of distortion circuits out there. This is input gain going into the circuit itself developing the fuzz, the distortion, the noise, the whatever you want to call it, is found in this combination of your fold control and your Pura control. The Pura is going to be more of the kind of traditional distortion flavor in this thing, as much as there can be traditional distortion anything in this thing. That Pura is going to be where you find that. Turning up your Pura control is going to be the thing that creates the more conventional version of clipping in this thing. And that fold control is going to be the amount of wave folding applied to your signal. And the wave folding approach is really interesting because instead of clipping like you would get with the Pura, the wave folding basically sets a threshold where any audio that passes over that threshold is folded back onto itself, creating this really interesting, very harsh kind of harmonic distortion. And that Pura and that fold kind of blend together to create a ton of different flavors of distortion throughout the pedal. Again, you're going to want some Pura for clipping, but that wave folding is a really interesting, very brutal texture available to you in this thing. Much synthier, much more noise rocky. And it's for all these reasons that when we get into our sound samples, we are not going to take a more traditional approach of picking a knob and just turning that knob to the min and max of the range. There's just not a lot of value in individual parameters in the Dystorpia. It really is the kind of overall balancing act of fine-tuning the way that the clipping in the Pura is folded on itself using the fold, and then the amount of harshness that you roll out of that with your tone control, and then the amount of body you re-inject into it by setting your mid-band. It's labyrinthian inside this thing. You have two switches down below. The left one is going to be a doom control, which is an off position, a sub-octave, and in the right position, that's sub-octave, but like blown out, like distorted, overloaded, creating a very chaotic industrial noise rock kind of octave down thing hitting that distortion circuit as well. And next to that is going to be an envelope, which is either got an off position, once again, or a dynamic or a gate. And what that basically is just an envelope that brings down the level of the pedal when it doesn't detect any playing to kind of try to mitigate some of the noise and spittiness and sputteriness of the circuit. If you've got really clean power like I do in my studio, this is actually a pretty non-issue because I was shocked by how clean this thing was, even with single coils, but that envelope can be really helpful as a subtle ducking that doesn't ever feel gated or a proper intelligent gate. You have an expression input on the right side that sweeps through the tone control range, giving you access to something of a very bizarre wah setup in this thing also. And that can be done over expression, over TRS, or over TS using control voltage. You have a freeze on the bottom left side because why wouldn't you have a freeze in a fuzz pedal that just captures the last little bit of your playing and holds it in place after all of your fuzz settings, which means you can kind of capture a fuzz drone bed and then make changes and then play over top of it without adjusting what is frozen in the first place. Because nothing is conventional in this thing. You have a blend control that goes from your dry tone up through your kind of fully fuzzed out circuit. There's a couple really interesting caveats to that, which is the dry tone that you can blend in using that blend knob is still impacted by your tone control and mid balance controls, as well as not being properly clean anyways. There's a slight amount of saturation and distortion applied to your clean tone in that blend, which I actually love. I've never really understood the appeal for a proper clean blend in a fuzz pedal, because the sound of totally clean, plinky electric guitar strings in the kind of forest of fuzz always felt somewhat incongruous and just added some anemia where you're hoping for clarity. But the EQ applied and a little bit of distortion and saturation applied to your dry tone actually makes that blend control the magic for this pedal, the thing that really takes some of these spittier, crazier sounds in here and allows you to bring them back into the realm of the real, the realm of the album ready and usable broadly. Running even some of the most chaotic sounds in here with that blend control set nice and low to bring in a lot of that original sound, but adapted for the context, actually makes this thing really versatile in ways that you wouldn't expect based on the spitty, chaotic nature of the circuit. But having said all that, let's go ahead and plug this thing back in and give it a listen. Like I said, we are not going to do single knob adjustments in this video. We are really going to start by looking at just the Pura and the Fold together, playing with that gain range throughout, taking a look at the tone and mid bands together, playing with the gain range throughout, and then that blend control, that doom control, and the envelope, and that freeze. So let's go ahead and get into it. So as always, before we get into our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and the context we're working in. I am playing my Bunting Melody Queen T, and we are running into the 29 pedals Una with all EQ switches in the off positions, running into the Dystorpia, and then into our amplifier, which is the Benson Monarch Plus, mic'd up with an AEA N22 ribbon mic. We're recording through a Soyuz Lakeside preamp and recording in Pro Tools. This is what our clean tone sounds like. So we're going to start things off with the Dystorpia with the blend control at maximum, so basically no clean tone getting through. We have our tone slightly south of noon to avoid too harsh of an initial kind of impact. We have our Pura control at noon with the Fold control at minimum so that we can get something approximating a real fuzz sound before we start getting into the really, truly chaotic stuff. Let's go ahead and give this thing a listen. So as you can tell, this thing is synthy and chaotic from the jump. Let's go ahead and start things off by taking a look at those Pura and Fold controls and how they interact with each other to give you anywhere from that kind of synthetic real fuzz all the way over to synthetic fake fuzz, which is going to be Pura and Fold respectively, more or less. We're not going to take a real focused look at the gain control specifically because it is not amount of gain in the pedal, it is input gain into the circuit. And so we will play with that gain control as we walk through things, just to kind of show how hitting those two parameters, the Pura and the Fold, at different gain levels adjusts to their response. interesting thing to kind of pay attention to with the Dystorpia is because this thing is producing such synthetic, non-real replications of your tone in the form of this kind of very synthy digital fuzz, things like your tone control do very little to mitigate some of these sounds. So the way we have things set up right now, here is our neck pickup with our tone control at maximum. And here it is with our tone control completely off. So for context, that's the difference between this and this. Okay, now that we've jumped back to something a little bit more reasonable while still in this totally chaotic synthy aesthetic, let's go ahead and give a listen to this blend control right here. As you can hear, that blend control is the key ingredient in creating a version of the Dystorpia that sounds somewhat like a real kind of traditional analog fuzz. And the reason it does that is actually really interesting, which is the blend control brings in your quote unquote dry guitar, but still saturates your dry guitar with that input gain while still also applying your tone and mid-range band controls to that clean guitar, which means it doesn't sound like you're blending in a squeaky clean version of your guitar alongside that synthy fuzz, because you're not. You're getting a slightly more married version of it, giving you access to a very natural sounding, slightly more true to form version of your guitar. Some real good video game music can be found in this thing, for sure. Let's go ahead and dial back to, once again, a slightly more natural version of this, utilizing the blend now, and fine-tune some of the harsher aspects of the sound we're in using those tone and mid-range band controls. So again, with that tone control down, we have a pretty doomy sound going on right now, even with the Telecaster bridge pickup that we are using right now. very chaotic, very brutal. Let's go ahead and play with the relationship between the mid-band and the tone control, because that mid-band is going to define a lot of aspects of that tone control that is otherwise pretty chaotic. Let's take the tone to noon and kind of showcase what the reason that we have it slightly south of noon right now. Okay, let's jump back to something somewhat more usable in the context of this pedal. And what I like about that is it's already pretty thick and doomy. So let's go ahead and take a look at that doom control. We have been in the off position so far, which is just the standard pitch of our guitar, but we can drop it to the center position, which is going to introduce a sub octave, and then to the right position, which introduces that sub octave, but at a really high gain rate that kind of blows out the kind of proverbial low end speaker of this thing. And of course, in all of this high gain madness and everything, you have access to a couple different envelope settings. We've had it off so far. But you can turn on a kind of like very lightly dynamic gate that will just slightly bring down your kind of signal when you're not playing, not in a dramatic gated way, but just in kind of like a cleaning up your life kind of way. Or you can jump over to an intelligent gate that's a little bit more aggressive. I'm fortunate enough to be in a studio that doesn't have a ton of noise problems, so a gated system for this thing isn't super essential for me, but obviously this thing is incredibly chaotic, so it can come in very handy. So let's go ahead and wrap things up with a couple additional things. Both are going to be using the hold control on the bottom left side of the pedal. And number one is going to be adjusting the output gain of the Dystorpia. And that's because you have obviously some very high gain chaotic sounds in here, but some of the low gain, voltage starved, slightly more natural sounding things that this thing is capable of doing tend to come with a trade-off of being relatively quiet as far as the device goes. So you can actually set a nice low gain, less chaotic sound and then boost the output of the pedal to make it still work in your chain. So let's give that a listen. And secondly, let's go ahead and utilize that infinite switch for its kind of usual use case, which is going to be freezing a recent bit of your playing in the kind of like buffer of the output stage of the Dystorpia, and it will hold consistent no matter what other changes you make to your settings.